Good evening, everyone. Beautiful day today, wasn't it? Felt good. Lord, speak to me. Lord, speak to me that I may speak in living echoes of thy tone. As thou hast sought, so let me seek thine erring children lost and lone. Oh, strengthen me that while I stand firm on the rock and strong in thee, I may stretch out a loving hand to wrestlers with the troubled sea. Oh, teach me, Lord, that I may teach the precious things thou dost impart, and wing my words that they may reach the hidden depths of many a heart. Oh, fill me with thy fullness, Lord, until my very heart o'erflow in kindling thought and glowing word, thy love to tell, thy praise to show. Oh, how sweet will be to meet the Lord when he comes in glory by and by. What a song of praise will be our Lord when he comes in glory by and by. We will have our robes all white as snow when he comes in glory by and by. Oh, be ready with the Lord to go when he comes in glory by and by. How sweet, when he comes in the sky. What joy, when he comes in glory by and by. I am longing for that happy day when he comes in glory by and by. For with him I hope to soar away when he comes in glory by and by. How sweet, when he comes in the sky. What joy, when he comes in glory by and by.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy you're here. If you are joining us live or later online, thank you for checking us out and for being here for this lesson. We are studying the book of Daniel, and we have arrived at Daniel chapter 11. This is the longest chapter in the book, and this is one that covers a lot of ancient history that prior to this last week, the last few days, I was unfamiliar with quite a bit of it. So this has been a treat to study. And we're going to be moving through this material at a slower pace. The book of Daniel, we've been going at about two weeks per chapter. We'll be spending 4 weeks in chapter 11 because of the volume of material and the interesting material that's in here. So this is the final vision of the book. There's the 4 visions, and we looked at this last week. Final vision of the book, Daniel is perhaps 84 to 89 years of age when this occurs. The introduction to this vision is in chapter 10, when he sees the divine individual and is given this divine message. And the core of this message starts in verse 2 of this chapter. It runs through chapter 12 in verse 3. And you have on your handout, I've got the passages on the first side, but then on the back side here, there's a few things that you can look at. The plan that we're going to take for tackling Daniel for the rest of the remainder of the time is back there, so you can see how we're going to address that. And I've got a summary outline of the 4th vision. There's a lot of different ways to break it down, but it's a summary of what's there. And so an unnamed messenger from Daniel chapter 10 spoke to Daniel, and he gives him predictions that essentially span 372 years of Palestine's history up to verse 35 of chapter 11. And that's where the interpreter's agreement ends. Once you get into verse 36 through 45, there's quite a bit of difference of opinion regarding that material. When we get there, we'll look at that. And then when we get to chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, we have one of the rare instances in the Old Testament where the writer talks about the resurrection of the dead. So that's going to be exciting when we get there. So that's really what we're looking at that's coming up here. If you'll recall, Daniel was in Babylon, or just outside Babylon at the river when this occurred. And he says that he understood the vision. He understood it as it was being delivered to him. And this concerned Israel, and particularly the history that the divine messenger gives him relates to how the people in Palestine will be impacted by world events. So there are kingdoms that we're going to talk about that span from Asia Minor to India, but what is most concerning in this particular vision is the impact on Palestine in that region there. So we're going to skip a little piece that's in my outline. Regarding those passages in verse 36 through 45, there are 4 main interpretations of this. Traditional interpreters look at that as possibly the future Antichrist, as a blend of references to Antiochus and the Antichrist, or a typological Antichrist. Critical scholars will say that particular passage relates to Antiochus Epiphanes, and then they go on to criticize the material because it does not mesh with what we have in the historical record. So you can see the contradiction that they're dealing with here when they present that idea. So those are the views, and when we get there, we'll look at that. So this history focuses on the exercise of power. Kings seeking to secure power ultimately fail, and this occurs despite marriage alliances, we're going to look at one tonight, and military force that gets applied. And without chapter 12, with those verses regarding the resurrection, this is a bleak prophecy. It's really talking about how Israel's going to be trod upon, especially near the end of the prophecy, and it's very sad. But God delivers his people in the end, and that's the thread of hope that comes through this. If you recall the book of Genesis, right? God comes to Abraham and he tells him, look at the stars of the heaven. Can you count the stars? Can you count the sand on the seashore? This is how your descendants are going to be. And then in chapter 15 of Genesis, he goes on to say that your descendants are going to be enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, right? But Abraham does not look at this as a prophecy of despair. He looks at this as a prophecy it's a positive prophecy. So the fact that there are negative events tied to this doesn't mean that the outcome is negative. The outcome of this prophecy is indeed positive. Both critical and traditional scholars agree, I'll repeat that, both critical and traditional scholars agree that the history presented in Daniel chapter 11, verses 2 through 39 is accurate. Critical scholar William B. Nelson writes, most of the historical details in Daniel 11, 2 through 39, which chronicles Persian through Hellenistic times, can be corroborated from ancient sources. He's a critical scholar. He's saying this all aligns with what we have in the historical record from multiple historical writers. Traditional scholar Tremper Longman writes, from what we know about the period, we can affirm that the prophet writes with the accuracy of a historian. The prophet writes with the accuracy of a historian. So what we're going to be looking at are the passages and the historical references tied to this. Let me give you a caveat related to this. Whenever you're dealing with history, historians are people that write down events. Sometimes the historians are not accurate, so there may be some inaccuracies on the historical information that I'm going to provide you with tonight. And recognize that. And I will pull some of that out when I can let you know about some of that I did find. This is going to be a historic highlight reel. And I'm not going to try to blow you away with a bunch of names and stuff. I want to keep that to a minimum. It'll be a highlight reel for the things that I thought were most intriguing as I went through this material. And I promise you, there is a lot there that's intriguing that I just can't cover. So tonight we're looking at 8 verses, Daniel chapter 11, verses 2 through 9. So the messenger begins with a promise, and he says, and now I will show you the truth. And moments later before saying this, the messenger mentioned the book of truth in verse 21 of chapter 10, which is just a couple sentences back, right? He says, but I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. Now, the book of truth or writing of truth doesn't appear anywhere else in Scripture. This is not a title like the book of life. God's foreknowledge of human history is on display in this prophecy. When the messenger concludes this prophecy, he's going to tell Daniel to seal the book. And the book of truth likely refers directly to this prophecy that we're going to be studying for the next few weeks in Daniel 11. So at the next part of verse 2, he talks about how Persia will anger Greece. This is the catalyst for all the different events that occur afterwards. In one sentence, the angel will span 200 years of history, from Cyrus to Xerxes to Alexander the Great, in a single sentence. Here it is. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. So in 536 BC, Cyrus the Great's 3rd regnal year, Daniel received this prophecy. That's where we are today in this prophecy. 536 BC. In 336 BC, Alexander the Great went to war with Persia. That's what this verse is bringing us to right here. And he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. And the phrase that you see in this passage, 3 more kings, and look at your handout. I've highlighted this on purpose. You'll see that there's the number 3 and the number 4 are highlighted. And then there's some passages down here in the Beyond Daniel where the verses are highlighted. We're going to talk about these. The phrase 3 more kings does not signal that Persia had only 3 kings followed by the rule of Cyrus the Great. That's not what he's telling us, okay? Persia had, including the short-lived rulers that they had, there are records of at least 13 Persian kings. So the number of the kings, and we're going to get to that, the number of kings is not what's crucial in this. What is crucial is the identity of the 4th king. Okay? 3 and then 4. Let's talk about this. And it's what I'm calling the totality pattern. I didn't actually find a term for this, but this is in Scripture. This is something that I was unaware of before studying Daniel chapter 11. So here we are. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. This pattern employs the number 3 followed by the number 4, and what it does is it conveys a totality of examples. Conveys a totality of examples. Solomon uses this pattern in Proverbs. Here we go. Proverbs 30. 3 things are never satisfied, 4 never say enough. Sheol, the barren womb, the land never satisfied with water, and the fire that never says enough. Okay? There's one example from Solomon. Amos, the prophet Amos, uses this pattern 8 times in the judgments from Amos in chapters 1 and 2. Here's one of those examples. For 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. For 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4. This is an example of a totality of examples. It's not saying that there's only 4 transgressions. Likewise, in this passage of Daniel, Daniel is not saying that there's only 4 more kings. He's saying this is a totality. So, beyond that, interpreters debate the identification of the 4 Persian kings. Longman mentions the 4 Persian kings recorded in the Bible: Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes. But he concludes that there were more kings after Cyrus the Great. Young suggests that 4 kings are associated with 4 important epochs, but he doesn't go on to say what those epochs were. This verse, what's important about this verse, let me back up to it again. What's important about this verse is that it's going to set up, and I don't have the totality of the verse here. This verse is going to set up the reason for Greece to invade Persia. That's what we're looking at. So, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece, and that's on your handout there. Considering the subsequent verses, the only king we care about is the 4th. And who is this 4th that stirred up Greece? This is going to be Xerxes. Now, we'll start with Darius the Great before we get to Xerxes. So, here is an image of Darius the Great that's at his tomb site, and I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. He first invaded Greece in 492 BC. In 490 BC, he was defeated at the Battle of Marathon. Darius intended to attack Greece, but was delayed, and then he died of old age. His son, Xerxes I, and here's the tomb of Darius the Great. This is at a site in Iraq where there are 4 tombs carved out of the side of a mountain that look very similar to this. Here is an example of 3 of those, and these are all famous Persian kings that were entombed there. And we'll have an image of the 4th as well coming up here. This is the tomb of Xerxes that's off to the right of those other 3. This is the Ahasuerus from the book of Esther. That's who we're talking about with Xerxes I. His son Xerxes I led a second invasion into Greece, using wealth amassed by crushing revolts in Egypt and Babylonia. Xerxes launched a grand military campaign against Greece, and he is called Ahasuerus in Esther. He was well known for battling Greece and for the wealth that he amassed. Now, go back to this verse here, verse 11, and it's on your handout. It's the highlighted verse here. at the end of the verse, and when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Okay? This is a clear reference to Xerxes the First. Xerxes led the Persian army in the battle of Thermopylae against King Leonidas of Sparta. For 3 days, 300 Spartan warriors and 700 Thespians kept the massive Persian army at bay. The Persian army was estimated at 120,000 to 300,000 soldiers, but they were bottlenecked where they were. So this small group of men was able to hold them off for 3 days. The film 300 pays homage to this battle. Xerxes won this battle in 480 BC. Following his victory at Thermopylae, what does he do? He marches into Athens and burns it to the ground. Eventually, the Greek states won decisive land and naval victories by 479 BC, and they repelled Persia. Now, Greece at this point is not a nation of Greece. It's city-states is what it is. So with the knowledge that we just talked about, let's review this passage again. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. 3 more kings and a 4th signals not a count, but a totality of Persian kings. The 4th will ignite a war with Greece. Steinman notes that there was no official kingdom of Greece at the time of Xerxes. Beginning with the phrase, he shall stir up, is best translated, he will awaken all, especially the kingdom of Greece. So, what happens with Greece? We move on to the great king of Greece. These invasions by Darius and by Xerxes left the Greek states bitter toward Persia and led to a united Greece under Philip II of Macedon. Father of Alexander the Great, Philip reformed the Greek army, and I'm going to show you something that he did. He reformed the Greek army. He made military service a full-time occupation. Philip equipped soldiers with long spears, light shields, and innovative formations like the Greek phalanx. This is a Macedonian phalanx illustration here that you're seeing. What this consisted of was a row of 16 men in the front by 16 men deep. They had these long pikes that were extended forward for the first 3 rows of men, and beyond them, the pikes started going up like this. By the time you got to the very last row of pikes, they're vertical. What effect does this have on the battlefield? Visually, you can't see what's happening behind this wall of pikes. Okay? If you are assaulted from the front by this, you are massacred. And this was revolutionary. Moreover, he was the first of the Mediterranean kings to have soldiers work full-time in their career as military individuals. So he was able to train them as much as he wanted to. It was the best trained, most efficient, most powerful army in the Mediterranean until the arrival of Rome. Nobody could beat the Greeks. This is Philip who came up with this. And he's the father, again, of Alexander the Great. Verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. So a royal bodyguard assassinates Philip on October 21st, 336 BC. Philip's son, Alexander the Great, assumed the throne, and he ruled from 336 to 323 BC. He has a short rule. Continuing his father's legacy, Alexander sought to avenge the Persian invasions. He conquered the Persian Empire within a decade. Now, the Achaemenid Empire, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, had lasted for over 1,000 years. And this Macedonian king comes in and takes it within a decade. Alexander the Great was a brilliant tactician, often outmanned as much as 5-1. He relied on speed and distraction to defeat the Persians. In battle, he used a hammer and anvil tactic. He would first pin the enemy in place with a Macedonian phalanx. This is what you're seeing here. And then he would charge their flank with cavalry in a wedge formation. Hammer and anvil tactic. So, Alexander the Great, if historical figures were football players, he would get the number 4. The number 4 is associated with Alexander the Great in the Bible. In Daniel 7, 4 great beasts rise from the sea. The third beast was a leopard with 4 wings, and this 4-winged leopard traditionally is referred to as Alexander the Great. Daniel 7, verse 6, after this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. 4 is associated with Alexander in Daniel chapter 11. Verse 4, and as soon as he had arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to authority which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So having conquered Persia, Alexander the Great decided he was going to reside in Babylon, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. And ironically, he dies in this palace at the age of 32. Historians are unsure if he died of fever or if he was poisoned. They don't know. Following this event, his generals divided the kingdom into 4 territories. According to the divine messenger, in verse 4, his kingdom was, quote, divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. Now, the 4 winds here do not point to cardinal directions, but to 4 rulers. And these are on your handout as well, up here. The Diadochi, and I apologize now. I'm going to mispronounce names and words. I watched some YouTube videos to try to get them right, but I'm sure I'll get some wrong. These are the 4 of the successors. There were more, but these are the 4 principal ones that we're dealing with here. And the 2 that are most critical on this list are Seleucus and Ptolemy, who are at the bottom. And we're going to see them noted as the kings of the north and the kings of the south. And this represents these individuals who had dynasties following them. Kings of the north, the Seleucids, and the kings of the south, the Ptolemies that were in Egypt. So the families of Seleucus and Ptolemy waged war with each other, and the messenger refers to them as kings of the north and the south. And there's a chart here that shows you the lines and lines them up with the dates that they were in power. So you can see who was opposed to who if you look across those lines. So verse 5. References to the kings of the north and the south relate to their proximity to Jerusalem. Okay? That's what we care about. And I've got a map here. Well, let me back up to this map. All right. This map here, where you see Canaan and Lebanon over here, Jerusalem's down over here, Egypt's here in the south, Syria to the north. So when they say the north or the south, that's what they're talking about. Kings of the north were the Seleucids. Kings of the south were the Ptolemies. Okay? So, the first king of the south is Ptolemy Soter. Oh, I missed this. This is Alexander the Great on a gold stater. That's an image of him. One of the fun things about this particular part of the study is you can look up any of the people that are here online, and you can find coins, busts, statues, contemporary depictions of these individuals. Okay, so the first king of the south is Ptolemy Soter. No, that's Nicator. I don't have Ptolemy in here. I'll show you. We'll get to Nicator in a minute. Ptolemy Soter founded the dynasty, and the Ptolemies, he was friends to Alexander the Great as a child. And when they decided that they were going to divide up the kingdoms, he wanted Egypt. He actually proposed to the generals, let's divide this up. I'd like to take Egypt. And he was the ruler of Egypt. And the Egyptians loved him because he was a good ruler to them. So the Ptolemies' kingdom fell to Rome in 30 BC. It lasted for that long. At the Battle of Alexandria, cautious and trustworthy, Ptolemy became Alexander's personal bodyguard and later a Macedonian general. Alexander married him to a Persian at a mass wedding in Susa. He actually married 4 of his generals to Persian women in Susa. And the reason for that was so that their offspring would be legitimate heirs to whatever satrapies that they were in. When Alexander died, Ptolemy was the one who proposed to divide the empire's provinces among the generals, and these 4 generals were called the Diadochi or Diadochi, which means successors. So, verse 5 again. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his, that's king of the south is Ptolemy, shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he and shall rule, and his authority shall be great authority. This is a reference to Seleucus Nicator. Now, this is the founder of the Seleucid dynasty, and he was a formidable individual. He was a Greek general who commanded an elite Macedonian unit called the Silver Shields. The Greek historian Appian of Alexandria wrote that Seleucus was, quote, tall and powerfully built, and that he once brought a wild bull under control with his bare hands. So he was called the Bull. And in this silver coin, you can see that he's wearing a helmet. Now, this helmet has leopard skin helmet, but then there's bull's horns and a bull's ear associated with that. He was known as the Bull. In 316 BC, during the Diadochi Wars, Seleucus fled to Egypt to escape Antigonus the One-Eyed. He was one of the other generals that received Macedonia, and this was his principal adversary throughout his life. Antigonus the One-Eyed. And what happened was, he was in Babylonia, and he had the satrapy of Babylonia that he was governing, and Antigonus came to him to give him an account of the money that he had spent. And apparently, he didn't spend it in a way that Antigonus approved of, and he fled. And where does he go? He goes to see his friend Ptolemy in Egypt. And he hid with him. While in Egypt, Ptolemy makes him an admiral. And in 312, just 4 years later, they jointly defeated the son of Antigonus in Syria. And that year, Seleucus reconquered Babylon. And it was easy for him to go in and take it back. At the height of the Seleucid Empire, it stretched from Asia Minor in the west to India in the east. Now, here is the map. This is on your handout on the back. And the Seleucid Empire, it's all this blue. It's incredible how big of an empire that he had. He was a good negotiator. He negotiated a territorial peace treaty with Chandragupta, who was the emperor of India. And part of that negotiation, he received 500 war elephants from the Indians. And these elephants enabled Seleucus to defeat Antigonus in the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC. People on the Mediterranean had never seen something like that. Can you imagine? Armored war elephants, these people coming on these beasts. You know, what is that? I'm going to die. Right? Totally demoralized. Anyways, that's part of him. Okay. I don't want to run out of time because this gets even more interesting. So, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, was the son of Ptolemy Soter. And again, the Ptolemies are in Egypt. He commissioned the Septuagint so that subjects familiar with Koine Greek could read the Hebrew Bible. The Septuagint, okay? And one of the other things that the Ptolemies did was, you've heard of the Library of Alexandria? That was them, Ptolemy I, Library of Alexandria. He had a policy, if you came into Egypt with documents, they confiscated them, they copied them, and they gave you a copy. Your original was gone, you got another manuscript. Isn't that crazy? So they had over 500,000 documents at the Library of Alexandria that Rome eventually burned to the ground when they came in and took Alexandria. So, to end the Second Syrian War, Ptolemy II made a treaty with Antiochus II, Theos. Okay, Antiochus II, Theos. And here's a coin. This is the last picture I have. Antiochus Theos. He makes a treaty with him. And this treaty stopped the war between those Syria and Egypt at that time. But this ignited a permanent feud between their dynasties. And we're going to see why. Verse 6. After some years they shall make an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south, king of Egypt, shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. Ptolemy offered his daughter, the Egyptian princess Berenike, and a large dowry to Antiochus. Ptolemy presented his daughter with a dowry and vast quantities of silver and gold. She became the Seleucid queen regent. Upon marrying, Berenike took the name Syra, S-Y-R-A, referring to her new home in Syria. Now, if you go online and you start looking up these names, I promise you it will get confusing because they reuse these names over and over and over. You go look for Cleopatra, you think you're going to get the Cleopatra that everybody's heard of, Elizabeth Taylor, but there were a lot of ladies named Cleopatra that were part of the Ptolemy dynasty. So upon marrying Berenike, she takes the name Syra. But there's a catch. He was married already to Laodike. And in order to marry Berenike, Antiochus had to divorce Laodike. So he divorces her and he exiles her to Ephesus. And to the children of Berenike, Antiochus promised royal succession to the Seleucid throne. He says, if the children sired by you, when I die, they will be king. That's the promise. And Laodike's children that she already has that should inherit the throne, they're cast aside. And to her, he offers land grants of large estate, tax exemption, and permanent trust issues. Verse 6, at the end of the verse, but she shall not retain the strength of her arm. This is talking about Berenike. And he and his arm shall not endure, talking about Ptolemy II. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her and he who supported her in those times. So the marriage between Antiochus and Berenike lasted for 7 years until Ptolemy II died. Until Ptolemy II died in 246 BC. Antiochus leaves Berenike and their infant son at Antioch, and he goes back to Ephesus to reclaim Laodike as wife. Laodike, who's been jilted in a massive, massive way, he goes back to reclaim her. They name the first son, the successor to the throne, who is Seleucus II. 6 months later, Antiochus dies in Ephesus, Appian of Alexandria, the historian, wrote of Laodicea that she poisoned Antiochus. To ensure her son's succession, Laodicea assassinated Berenike, her infant, and her Egyptian attendants, and in that same year, Berenike's father also died. So, back to the passage. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her and he who supported her in those times. The references are crystal clear. If you know the history and you look at the passage, you can say, wow, look at how closely that actually mirrors what happened. So true to the prophecy, Berenike, her father Ptolemy, and her husband Antiochus II, who supported her, did not endure. Berenike's brother, Ptolemy III, succeeded the throne in Egypt. And to avenge the murder of his sister, he waged a 5-year war against Syria. Verse 7, and from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place. This is talking about her brother. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, against the Syrians, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He goes in and he's victorious. He captures and executes Laodicea. Ptolemy III plundered Syria extensively to the extent that he took their idols. Now, if you took the idols of a nation, that was symbolically subjugating them. You take their gods, you've subjugated them, right? These are idols that the Syrians formerly had captured from Egypt and brought them. Verse 8, he shall also carry off to Egypt their gods, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. So upon returning their idols, the Egyptians gave him a new surname, which meant benefactor. Ptolemy was unable to secure control in Syria, and leaving Syria, he returned to Egypt to put down a rebellion. His rival, Seleucus II, so you have Ptolemy II and Seleucus II. Ptolemy III and Seleucus II. His rival, Seleucus II, restored his authority in Syria. Then he attempted to invade Egypt, but this failed. Verse 9, then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Matches with the messenger's prophecy. The historic events that occur long into the future align with the prophecy. And here the latter was Seleucus II, who, failing to invade the south, returned. So, where does that leave us? Next week, we're going to pick up in verse 10. In verses 10 through 20 is going to conclude the wars between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So we're going to see that particular part of the prophecy play out. So if you're following along and you're reading along, if you just want to read, verses 10 through 20, you're in good shape. And if you don't understand it, that's okay. At least you'll have some familiarity with us. This has been a lot of fun to study. I hope it's interesting to you. And next week we'll pick up in verse 10. Thank you so much.